Well, good morning there, folks. Welcome to another episode of Miyagi Mornings, episode 88, if I have the number right, and I think that I do. It's a Wednesday, so it should be an 88, at least this week. Anyway, we are going to talk today about choosing a property in a little bit of a different light. Here's the exact question as it was asked to me on my MeWe page, and if you want to ask a question or give feedback for Miyagi Mornings, you can do that in the comments section of the video. But the way to really get on the radar for a question in a new episode is the MeWe page. You can find me on MeWe and friend me up and look at my profile. It'll be the sticky post at the top of the page. So, other than location and politics, what is the one thing or top three things you would look for in a new property to buy if you had to start a new homestead? Climate, water, amount of land, shape of land, elevation changes, something else. Well, I looked at this and said, to do this question justice, I really need to hit 9 points, right? And there's actually a lot more, but like 9 points will fit in condensed version into a Miyagi Mornings episode. I've done entire podcasts about this. If you go to thesurvivalpodcast.com and search land or real estate, you'll probably find a lot of episodes that will go further on this stuff. But I want to start off with the top three things that we look at a piece of land for through the permaculture lens. I think he's asking this question the way he's doing because he knows I really despise government. And I think the more local the government, probably the more oppressive it is because all they can do is add to what other governments do. So even though I'm not going to really talk about it, HOAs, POAs are the devil, right? Do not move to a place with an HOA or a POA. You do have to look at politics. You do have to look at the hooks that cities, townships, counties, etc. haven't. You can't ignore that, but we'll ignore it for this discussion. But please don't for your own use. But going through the permaculture lens first, your first three primary things you want to look at. It's easy to remember, and I suggest you memorize it so you always think this way when you look at a piece of property. Water, access, structure. So what water is on the property? How can I get water on the property? Do I need a well? Is it on city? Is it on grid? Are there places I can put ponds in? Is there a creek? Are there opportunities when we get into structure for rain catchment? Where would that water be if we did rain catchment? How easy is it to move somewhere else on the property? How does water move across the property? That has to do with landform that we'll get to in a minute, but we need to look at it just in the very beginning from a standpoint of just how it affects water. What are the opportunities to impound water, to infiltrate water? Where are places where water is going to be a problem if we don't? Water's life, so that's where we start there. Water first, right? Next, access. Access is how we're going to be able to get to all parts of the property. So some properties, being really steep, might be difficult. We want to take our roads as close as we can to contour and only make elevation changes in very conservative and careful ways. We want to look at, is there a reason we can't access the property from the rear of the property? Are we okay with that? Even with making a decision about buying a property, we want to start from this access issue because what we do not want to do, we do not want to design access out of a property. We want to make sure we maintain access. So we're going to be looking, how can we move people, vehicles, and things across this property? Now, if this is a quarter-acre property in the suburbs, that's not as big a deal. But as you get into more of rural property, even small acreage, couple 3 acres, you really want to look at access. You might realize, this property's great, but I am going to need something beyond shoe leather express, like we used to call it as a kid, to get to the back of the property. And this landscape is brittle enough, I really don't want to be driving my truck back there. So that means this is going to necessitate something like a UTV or a small tractor or something like that. And then you have to think about that in your budget, right? So access. Next, structure. Structure we look at in two ways. What are the existing structures on a property? Everybody kind of already does this. But I think a lot of times people don't really think about how those structures will interplay with the total grand plan. So the structure everybody focuses on is the house. And we do want to look at the house. And if we're thinking about retrofitting things for energy efficiency, like obviously a house that is south-facing is going to be easier to put some big old windows in the front of and get thermal passive heat gain in your winters. And if the house is oriented where it's facing west, it's going to bake in the heat. So we can look at those things as well. What's the condition of the structures, et cetera. But we want to look at outbuildings. Because outbuildings play right back into what I already talked about. If we have a great big outbuilding, if there's a roof on it, water, catchment, right? So that's part of it. Where is that structure located? What can we do with that structure? What do we want to do with that structure? Everybody's like, well, it's got a great big building on it. Okay, what are you going to do with it? Maybe there's another property with a building that's better suited to what you want. And maybe that building is considered less valuable by a property assessor, so you're going to pay less for it. So think about water access structure. Moving on. These are more in general, but I also look at everything through the permaculture lens. That means everything I look at, I say to myself, how does permaculture design science apply to this? And I mean that when I evaluate a business, not just land, but definitely with land. So the next is the land shape. Land shape is critical because land is generally priced by the acre, one way or another. Like you're going to, all things being equal, you'll pay more for 5 acres than 3. And unless land is really funky in the way it's shaped, it won't get you a discount on it. And, excuse me, must be COVID. Anyway, so you won't usually get land on the cheap just because it's not really ideally shaped unless it's really stupidly shaped and then you really don't want it. But here's what I mean. Let's say you gave me a choice between 2 properties, and I actually had this choice when I chose the property I'm on right now. I can have 8 acres, but I can literally stand on the back property line, and even with my busted ass shoulder from all my injuries, I can gently throw a baseball and hit the road because it's just a narrow, long strip. Or I can have 3 acres. It's also rectangular, but it's really deep and long. I chose a 3-acre property. It was much more suited for what I wanted to do. The 8-acre property we looked at was very narrow, very long, had a house on one end, and had this long-ass strip. There was a cornfield behind it and a road in front of it. Not a whole lot of opportunity there. It's kind of like owning the damn strip between a road and somebody's house is how it felt. And so shape is really important to me. My preferred shape of a property is going to be mostly square. The squarer it is, generally, the better it's going to lay out. And that allows you to locate, we're talking about access and structure, to locate a house, if it's not already built, a little bit far enough back to where we don't feel like we're looking at the road every day, and we have a good position kind of central on the property, depending on landform. We may actually choose to put the house not so centralized, but if it's square or rectangular with reasonable depth in the rectangle, then even if we're going to be like up on the north corner or whatever, we can be back enough from the property line with the structure to see less of our neighbors or other things that we may not want to see. So shape is a big thing to me. I don't like narrow strips. I don't like weird trapezoids, things like that. You end up with this property that it says it's 20 acres, but it's got a pretty good decent hunk here, but it's got a very long, unusable thing going on. Unless, water plays into it, and that's a creek boundary, and it's a beautiful creek with trout swimming in it. Like, you have to, relative to all the other factors is how this goes. Next is land form. So we're talking about elevation changes and stuff like this. I prefer land to be mostly flat. I really do. Everything is easier when land is mostly flat. I do like some elevation change. It gives you a lot of opportunity for water catchment, overland flow. It gives you a lot of opportunities with dams and ponds and things like that. So I like some elevation change. My property right here has, across most of it, it's 2% grade. I mean, it looks as flat as a pancake. The contours are there, but you have to really, laser level them out to find them. There's a few places where I have maybe a 4 to 6% grade. That's steep here. I'd like a little more than I have, but I would like to be generally flat. Really steep mountainous land, it can be beautifully designed. The older you get, the harder it is. I'll just say that. And everything's easier with relatively flat land. Next, you want to look at surrounding properties, structures, and natural features. And think about scale of permanence here. So if you have you're on the north side of a big hill in the northern hemisphere, and you're going to get very little sunshine, that hill or that mountain, that natural structure is never going away. It's there forever. You can't change it. If you buy a property and it's got some big trees and you say, I don't really want to cut all the trees down, but I need to open up this one area. You can chainsaw and those can come down and you can create a glade. You're not moving a mountain. At least you shouldn't be, right? I mean, coal companies do it all the time, but we shouldn't be moving mountains. And you're not going to move a mountain on somebody else's property to let sun into your place. So you want to look at those surrounding properties. If you have neighbors that seem like they're going to be bad neighbors, don't do it. It's type 1 error. You're going to regret it for the rest of your life after you make the decision. Why do we do this? You need to look at everything that's immediately around the property. Are there things there that you think you can live with, but you probably won't want to? We looked at several properties that were just off main interstates. Now, they weren't in cities or towns. That wasn't the issue. The issue is 24/7, 365. Traffic noise. And people are like, well, I'll plant trees or whatever. Let me tell you, I'm a fisherman. I fish a lot of creeks that are right near roads. And you can be down in thick-ass woods with babbling brook, and you still hear that road. Trees only do so much to diffuse sound when the sound's right there. So really look at everything around and close and adjacent to the property and how it affects your goals. Next, soil type. If you go, I want to put ponds in. Well, you need clay. Is there clay in the soil? Now, you might get a place like me. I always wanted ponds, but I took a gamble on this place, and it didn't work with putting in-ground ponds, and it was impossible because of the rock, right? But everything else was so much a better case for it that I wasn't willing to not buy it for that. But if you really want to put ponds in, either you have the ability to dig a hole, because in rock it's difficult if not impossible, and then if you have all sand, you're going to have to import clay. Now, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to try to use glee or manure or whatever over time to create an impoundment, maybe, or artificial liners or something, bentonite? You're going to have to do something if you want to do that. But sand is really good for growing certain things, right? Especially sandy soil, not pure sand, right? It's one of those things you really do want to at least consider the soil type. If nothing else, you want to take a shovel with you and see if you can dig a hole about a foot before you hit rock. Right? I mean, I did that here and just went, I'm going to have to live with this because everything else was so amazing. The other infrastructure, which is the next thing, your infrastructure. What's on that property already? If you have a property that's fenced and cross-fenced, then the appraiser's only going to, factor its value at a low rate to what it would cost to install. That's instant equity, in my opinion, because equity to me is not what's on my balance sheet that the bank is going to loan against. Equity is what's on my balance sheet that I know, hey, I can't afford to do this. One of the reasons I bought this property, infrastructure, the outbuildings. So that goes under structure, but it also goes under infrastructure. With two ways to look at it, right? And so I looked at the two steel buildings on my property and went, that's $100,000 that's not being factored into the appraisal. Because that's what it would cost me to have those two buildings put in today. $100,000 minimum for both of them. So that was like a huge gain. It gave me a place to do workshops, build a workshop for my tools, but also workshops for people to hang out in and learn in. Big 3-bay garage, like all that was really important infrastructure. The fencing, the cross fencing. Is there a well? Like if you're going to be a place where you need a well, and people are like, I'll just put a well in. People in their head are like, yeah, a well's about $6,000. Really? Are you sure? Because around here it's more like 30 if you can get somebody to do it, because they're all working for oil and gas companies, putting in wells for their fracking operations. Well, I hate fracking. Doesn't matter that you hate it. All that matters is when you need somebody to come drill you a well, anybody that's good at it is busy doing it for the oil and gas companies. They have to pull off one of those jobs to do years, and so they're getting $20,000 to do it for the oil and gas company. And the oil and gas company doesn't give a shit. And so they're going to ask 30 to do it for you. And if they get in the middle of something that gets kind of hard, they'll pull off your job. You'll be waiting. So what's the value of a well? The value that's already there. It depends on where you're at. But that's a piece of infrastructure. If there's piping in the ground to move water from your well or from your city water or whatever, that's an incredible value. You need to look at that. And if the infrastructure you're going to want is not there, what's it going to take to get it in? Now we're back to looking at access. That's part of it. But how much is it going to cost to build that pole barn? And make sure you actually know the answer to it. So that way when you're looking at another property that has one that just needs a little rehabbing, you're making a good economic decision long term. You have to think long-term value. And the last one I have for you today is climate relative to the property. So, he's saying, the person asked the question was specific to, don't say look in Texas because you live in Texas. I think that's what I kind of got out of that. But I also would say that, like, a property that would be marginal in one climate might be exceptional in another. So if you have a climate that's more temperate, has full real winters, full real summers, good 4-season property, lots of rain, etc. A property a little more like mine with, shallower soils in it is still going to be a lot more resilient than a property here like that, where we have this summer dearth where we usually go 3 months without a drop of rain with temperatures in the hundreds. So you're going to look at the property, its soil type, everything we talked about in relation to the climate type that you're in. So a property that I might give an A+ to in New Jersey, you move that property to Central Texas, and all of a sudden I am now giving it a C+, because you're not going to get the rainfall you do in New Jersey. You're not going to get the rest in the winter. There's so many things. And then I'm going to be also like, well, Texas is better than New Jersey, but I'm not supposed to talk about that today. And I'm allowed to talk shit about New Jersey because guess what, friends and neighbors? I was born there at Fort Monmouth Army Hospital. Anyway, with that, we have wrapped up another episode. I hope this helps you think more about when you're making land choices. And I know somebody's going to ask, well, how much land do you need? As much as you can get. But really, I would say that you can have a really great homestead on 1.5 to 2 acres if it's laid out appropriately and you got the water, the access, the structure, and all these other things down. I'm not even shy about going down to like a 1/2 acre to 3/4 acre, depending on who you are and what you want to do. Anything less than a 1/2 acre, I would keep looking. Definitely. With that, I will catch you tomorrow with another episode.